Second War. The French saw this as a breach of the terms of the Treaty of Bretigny. Charles V of France then declared that all the English possessions in France were forfeited in 1369. War broke out again, and Edward III resumed the title of King of France, renewing his claim to the French throne. With the Black Prince gone from Castile, Henry of Trastamara led a second invasion that ended with Peter's death at the Battle of Montiel in March 1369. He was now the new King of Castile. France had got itself a new ally. The next year, in August 1373, John of Gaunt, accompanied by John de Montfort, Duke of Brittany, led a force of 9,000 men from Calais on a chevauchée. They were initially successful, but as they moved south, they came across concentrations of French forces. However, under orders from Charles V, the French avoided a set battle. Instead, they fell on forces detached from the main body to raid. The weather was turning severe for the men and horses died in great numbers. At dawn in December, they made it into friendly territory of Gascony, and by the end of December, they were in Bordeaux, starving, ill-equipped, and having lost over half of the 30,000 horses with which they had left Calais. To exploit this weakness of the English, the Franco-Castilian navy, led by Admirals de Vienne and Tovar, managed to raid the English coast for the first time. With his health deteriorating, the Black Prince returned to England in January 1371, where his father, Edward III, was elderly and also in poor health. The prince's illness was debilitating, and he died after 5 years, on June 8, 1376. Edward III of England also died the following year, on June 21, 1377, and was succeeded by the Black Prince's second son, Richard II, who was still a child of 10. In France, the army under the leadership of Du Guesclin pushed the English back, and by the time Charles V died in 1380, the English held only Calais and a few other ports. Richard, the new young King of England, faced many challenges during his reign, including the Peasants' Revolt in 1381. After the deaths of Charles V and Du Guesclin in 1380, France lost its main leadership and overall momentum in the war. Charles VI, who succeeded his father as King of France, was still young at the age of 11, and he was thus put under regency. In 1388, power was passed to him as Charles VI. With France now facing widespread destruction, plague, and economic recession, the war effort against England was stopped. In the autumn of 1388, both adversaries signed a 3-year truce at Lullingham, putting the second phase of war at rest. In 1389, Richard of England's uncle and supporter, John of Gaunt, returned from Spain, and Richard was able to rebuild his power gradually until 1397. In 1399, his uncle, John of Gaunt, died, leaving his son to Richard. But Richard II of England disinherited Gaunt's son, Henry of Bolingbroke, sending him into exile. After a few years in exile, Bolingbroke returned to England with his supporters, deposed Richard from the English throne, and had himself crowned Henry IV. In 1392, Charles VI of France had suddenly descended into madness, forcing France into a regency dominated by his uncles and his brother. The domestic and dynastic difficulties faced by England and France in this period quieted the war for a decade. In England, Henry IV died in 1413 and was replaced by his eldest son, Henry V. It is the year 1413, and there has been no fighting between the two powers for over a decade. However, war was returning soon. Henry V of England resumed the claims of King of France through his great-grandfather, Edward III of England. In the ensuing negotiations, Henry said he would give up his claim to the French throne if the French would pay the 1.6 million crowns outstanding from the ransom of John II, although he had died, and also concede English ownership of the lands of Anjou, Brittany, Flanders, Normandy, and Touraine, as well as Aquitaine. Henry would also marry Catherine, Charles VI's young daughter, and receive a dowry of 2 million crowns. The French responded with what they considered the generous terms of marriage, with Catherine, a dowry of 600,000 crowns, and an enlarged Aquitaine. However, by 1415, negotiations had come to a halt, with the English claiming that the French had mocked their claims and ridiculed Henry himself. The French rejected his demands, leading Henry to prepare for war.